Welcome to the ICMR NBCCP prescribing skill course for the Indian medical graduate. I'm Dr. Ritika Malik Yadav. I'm a clinical scientist from ICMR NIIH, and I'll be taking you through an approach to hemoglobinopathies. At the end of this module, please answer the MCQ questions which are provided in the assignment section. The module merely addresses the basic presentation of a patient, a simple approach to diagnosis at the PHC level, and pointers as to when the patient should be referred. It contains case studies, diagnostic treatment algorithm, do's and don'ts, and take-home messages. At the end of this module, the Indian medical graduate should be able to understand the clinical approach to common hemoglobinopathies and order appropriate investigations, know the management of these disorders needed at the PHC level and the referral criteria, and be aware of imparting genetic counseling to such families and availability of prenatal diagnosis. So let's begin. Hemoglobinopathies comprise of all genetic diseases affecting hemoglobin. They broadly fall into two major categories: the quantitative or the thalassemia syndromes, comprising of the alpha thalassemia and the beta thalassemia, and the qualitative or the structural variants, for example, the sickle cell disease, HBD and HBE. The prevalence of beta thalassemia carriers is 3 to 4% in the general population. About 10 to 15,000 babies are born with thalassemia major every year, with a total burden of 1 to 1.5 million patients in the country. The prevalence of beta thalassemia is higher in certain ethnic groups like Sindhis, Kachhi Banushalis, Lohanas, Punjabi Khatris and Aroras, Bengalis, some Muslim groups and tribal populations from Odisha and Gujarat. Some other common beta chain variants in India are delta beta thalassemia, HBE and HBD Punjab. Sickle cell disease is prevalent in certain ethnic groups in the central, western and southern India, with a prevalence of 1 to 40%. So it becomes very important to build the capacity of our doctors in suspecting and diagnosing these disorders, as well as counseling the affected family to prevent future birth of affected babies. Here I would like to mention that hemoglobinopathies are inherited in an autosomal recessive fashion. So if both the parents are thalassemia carriers, then in each pregnancy there is a 25% chance that the child will be normal, a 50% chance that the child will have thalassemia minor, and a 25% chance that the child will have thalassemia major. So what is important to note here is that while counseling, you have to emphasize that the chance is there in each and every pregnancy. So now we will discuss the approach to hemoglobinopathies through case scenarios. The first case is that of a 6-month-old child where the mother notices lethargy, refusal to feed, paleness of the body, abdominal distension, failure to thrive, with or without a relative with a history of similar complaints in childhood and now on monthly transfusions. So which investigations will you order? You will get a CBC with a peripheral smear and HPLC, which is high performance liquid chromatography. High performance liquid chromatography is the investigation of choice for quantification of hemoglobin fractions and for detecting variants of hemoglobin and quantifying them. So of noting here is that normally HbF is high in newborns and it gradually drops till 6 months of age, after which HbA or the adult hemoglobin becomes the predominant component. So before going over to the findings in our patient, let's look at the normal findings. On the left side of the slide, we can see the CBC and the peripheral smear. The RBC indices show a mean corpuscular volume which is more than 80 and a mean corpuscular hemoglobin which is more than 27. The peripheral smear shows a normocytic normochromic picture. The HPLC on the right side shows the hemoglobin fractions. The different hemoglobin fractions elute at different but specific retention times. So in this chromatogram we can see that the HbA2 concentration is less than the cutoff of 3.5% and the HbF is less than 2%. Coming to our patient, we can see that the peripheral smear shows anisopoikilocytosis, nucleated RBCs, target cells and teardrop cells. Coming to the CBC, the MCV is less than 70 and the MCH is less than 20. This slide shows the chromatogram. On the left side, the HPLC of an untransfused patient shows an HbF concentration of more than 90% with an HbA of less than 10% and HbA2 concentration of 2.1%. When you see such an HPLC chromatogram, You need to check whether the age of the child is less than 6 months or more than 6 months. Another thing to note is that you need to check upon the transfusion history, because in case of a transfused patient, you might come across a picture in the same patient like in the HPLC on the right side, where the HbA is 79.7% and the HbF is 10.2%. So if you see a chromatogram like this and you know that the patient has had a transfusion, you can ask for HPLC for the parents, or you can reassess the HPLC of this patient after 1 month. Now the next question is whether a molecular workup is necessary in all patients. So in case the patient's CBC, peripheral smear and HPLC point towards a clear diagnosis of thalassemia major, molecular workup is not required. However, if you feel that the HPLC is non-contributory, and in cases where a prenatal screening might be needed in a subsequent pregnancy, it is better to do a molecular workup, for which 3 to 5 ml of whole blood in EDTA tube should be sent for molecular confirmation to a medical college. The results of molecular analysis takes about 2 to 3 weeks, and it is usually done by a CRDB or ARMS PCR. The commonest mutation in the Indian population is IVS15G2C. So coming over to the next case, we have a 4-month ANC with anemia on investigation and non-response to oral hematinics. Again, you order a CBC with peripheral smear and HPLC. Now to note here is that a Menza's index can act as a simple tool to differentiate between thalassemia carriers and iron deficiency anemia. It is calculated as MCV on RBC count in milli per microliter. If the value is less than 13, it should raise a suspicion of thalassemia trait. However, if it is more than 13, then iron deficiency anemia is more likely. However, a combined iron deficiency anemia and thalassemia trait cannot be ruled out. So if we look at the investigation results of our patient, we see anisopoikilocytosis, microcytic hypochromic anemia and occasional target cells. The RBC count is higher with a low MCV of less than 70, MCH of 21.1, and the HPLC chromatogram on the right side shows that the HbA2 concentration is more than 3.5, it is 5.4%, and the HbF is less than 2%. So these findings are seen in a patient with beta thalassemia trait. So in case you find a beta thalassemia trait in an ANC, the spouse also needs to be screened. And if both the partners are identified as trait, you need to counsel the couple and refer them for a prenatal diagnosis. So for the molecular workup, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks. So it is advisable to counsel the family timely, as we know that termination of pregnancy is allowed up to 20 weeks of gestation. So to recapitulate, we should investigate any child with anemia not responding to iron supplements, irritability, poor growth, inability to perform in school, bony facial changes and hepatosplenomegaly. Carrier screening is done in all pregnant women, premarital couples, school and college-going children in high-risk communities, extended family members of beta thalassemia major and sickle cell disease, and siblings of carriers identified during screening. Newborn screening for sickle cell disease is also being carried out in areas of high prevalence. We have already discussed through the case-based scenarios as to how to investigate. However, I would like to point out that iron deficiency can coexist with beta thalassemia. So in the event of a low mean corpuscular volume, iron studies are recommended. You should order serum ferritin. If the value comes out to be more than 12 nanogram per ml, go for HPLC. If the serum ferritin is less than 12 nanogram per ml, consider iron deficiency anemia. Give the patient a trial of iron supplements for 3 months. And if he or she does not respond, then you should go for HPLC. The management of transfusion-dependent thalassemia can be broadly classified into supportive therapy, definitive thalerapy, and education and genetic counseling. The definitive therapy, that is bone marrow transplantation, is quite expensive and is available at few centers across the country. So majority of the patients undergo supportive therapy in the form of blood transfusion, iron chelation, and management of complications. Once diagnosed, a regular follow-up of the patient, initiation of chelation, education and genetic counseling can be done at the level of the PHC. Education and genetic counseling will comprise of family screening, premarital counseling, and counseling for prenatal testing. So a confirmed case of beta thalassemia homozygous with a hemoglobin of less than 7 gram % needs to be transfused. In case the patient has clinical criteria of poor growth, facial changes, fractures, or clinically significant extramedullary hematopoiesis, blood transfusion may be considered even if the hemoglobin is more than 7 gram percent. So the do's would be a molecular confirmation of diagnosis, only transfusing packed red cells. If not available, then use whole blood. It should be less than 14 days old. Maintain a pre-transfusion hemoglobin of 9 to 10 gram percent. If available, use a leukodepletion filter. Counsel the family about the diagnosis and future course. And if the patient is not maintaining hemoglobin on adequate regular blood transfusions, suggesting alloimmunization or hypersplenism, refer to a higher center. Now coming to the don'ts. Do not transfuse if the diagnosis is not confirmed and if the patient is clinically stable. However, if transfusion is urgent, preserve 3 ml EDTA sample for a baseline diagnostic testing. HPLC is now available at most of the district hospitals and can be referred. Avoid oral iron supplements in case of a suspected case of thalassemia, and do not delay referral if the patient is sick. Monitoring in case of patients with thalassemia comprises of 6 monthly serum ferritin, SGOT, SGPT, blood urine nitrogen, serum creatinine, calcium, phosphorus, height, weight and growth velocity. Annually, the patient will need to undergo hepatitis B, hepatitis C and HIV testing. For children more than 10 years of age, blood sugar or GTT, TSH, ECG, echocardiography and MRI T2 scan for the heart or the liver, and the DEXA scan needs to be done. Now coming over to the chelation therapy. Monitoring of ferritin levels is done 6 monthly. Chelation needs to be started after 2 years of age or after 10 to 20 blood transfusion where the serum ferritin level is more than 1000 nanogram per ml on 2 separate measurements obtained when the child is well. So it is important to note that the ferritin level should be done when the child is well, as it can be spuriously high if the child is sick at the time of doing the measurement. Deferasirox is the first line drug which is given orally at 20 mg per kg per day. The dose can be increased by 5 mg per kg per day every 3 monthly based on the ferritin report. Administration on an empty stomach, dissolved in a glass of water or fruit juice. It can be given in 2 divided doses if the patient cannot tolerate a once daily dose. It is contraindicated in case of renal failure or significant renal dysfunction. In case of persistent or severe adverse events, refer to a higher center. We will recapitulate the conditions when the thalassemia patient needs to be referred to a higher center. For confirmation of diagnosis, that is molecular workup, and for making the blood transfusion plan, and management of increasing ferritin levels. In case the PRBC requirement is more than 250 ml per kg per year, in order to maintain a baseline hemoglobin of 9 to 9.5 gram per deciliter. In case of a patient with complications of iron overload like cardiac failure, liver failure or diabetes mellitus, and in case of persistent high ferritin values or adverse event to iron chelators or poor response to chelation. Coming over to case 3, the child presents with pallor, history of recurrent fever, joint pains, jaundice or a family history of similar complaints. Now here, in addition to CBC with peripheral smear and HPLC, you may need to order a sickling test. Sickling test detects if the red blood cell inappropriately changes into a sickle shape or a crescent shape after the blood sample is mixed with 2% sodium metabisulfite, which is a chemical that will reduce the amount of oxygen that it carries. Receiving a sickle test within 90 days after a blood transfusion may lead to inaccurate test results. So again, if we look at the chromatograms, on the left side we see a chromatogram where the S window is more than 50%, the HbA2 is less than 3.5% and the HbF is more than 10%. This is a picture of a typical HbS homozygous state. The HbS elutes after the HbA2. So that is where you will see the HbS window. Now coming on to the chromatogram on the right side, it also shows an S window which is more than 50%, but here the A2 concentration is 4.7%. So this is an HbS beta thalassemia. Our case 4 is another ANC with 3 months pregnancy in a region with high prevalence of sickle cell disease. Again, we will do a complete blood count with peripheral smear, sickling test and HPLC. So the peripheral smear of our patient shows sickle-shaped RBCs after incubating with 2% sodium metabisulfite solution. The HPLC chromatogram on the right side shows an S window of 20 to 40%, HbA2 concentration of 3.3% and an F concentration of less than 2%. So this is typical of a case of HBS trait. In case of a sickle cell trait, spouse screening becomes very important, and if the spouse is also a carrier for sickle cell trait, you will need to counsel the couple for prenatal testing. In case the couple has a previous child with sickle cell disease, you can directly counsel for prenatal testing, skipping the step of HPLC. This is also applicable for a thalassemia major child. The management of sickle cell disease child comprises of monitoring the child every 2 to 3 months for the first 2 years, and then thereafter at least every 3 months depending on the clinical course. The comprehensive management of sickle cell disease includes preventive health management, management of acute painful crisis, hydroxyurea therapy and monitoring, management of complications, and education and counseling. I'll be going through these in short. Those who want to go through the details can refer to handouts 2 and 3. The preventive health maintenance will comprise of immunization with the pneumococcal and the influenza vaccine. The pneumococcal conjugate vaccine is given at 6 and 14 weeks and thereafter a booster, and the polysaccharide vaccine, which is given 1 month after the conjugate vaccine and then a booster at 5 years of age. The schedule is provided in the handout for your benefit. Folic acid supplementation is done at 5 mg per day for a child more than 1 year and 2.5 mg per day for a child less than 1 year. In addition, antimicrobial prophylaxis with penicillin is done up to the age of 5 years. Oral penicillin 125 mg twice a day from 2 months to 3 years of age, and thereafter 250 mg daily up till 5 years of age. For patients who are allergic to penicillin, you can switch to erythromycin. In addition, you need to maintain adequate hydration and avoid exposure to extremes of temperature to reduce the crisis episodes. Symptomatic treatment will be required in case of vaso-occlusive crisis, which will comprise of pain relievers, maintaining adequate hydration, and then referring to a higher center for further management. In case the child has an infection, antimicrobials will need to be added. Blood transfusion is rarely needed. You might need to transfuse if the hemoglobin is less than 5 gram% or if the patient is symptomatic for anemia. In case of complications like acute neurological symptoms or acute chest syndrome, toxicity to hydroxyurea, you will need to refer the child to a higher center. Along with the medical treatment, simple measures like resting in a warm place, maintaining adequate hydration, and avoiding exposure to extremes of temperature can reduce the number of episodes of crisis. Now in short, we will discuss about the hydroxyurea therapy. So all children more than 2 years of age and all adults should receive hydroxyurea. However, if the patient is symptomatic, the child can be started hydroxyurea even after 9 months of age. The dose is 10 to 15 mg per kg per day as a single morning dose. In a patient with chronic kidney disease, the dose is 5 to 10 mg per kg per day. Once the patient is compliant, in the event of no response, for example, if the patient has recurrent crisis or stroke or acute chest syndrome, dose escalation can be done by 5 mg per kg every 4 to 6 weeks to a maximum of 20 to 30 mg per kg per day. But this should be attempted only in a facility where you can follow up the patient. You need to monitor the CBC of the child every 4 weeks till 3 months and then 3 monthly. In case there is neutropenia of less than 1500 or a thrombocytopenia of less than 80,000, withhold hydroxyurea and monitor the CBC weekly. When the counts recover, restart the treatment at 5 mg per kg per day lower than the previous dose on which the patient had cytopenia. Hydroxyurea solution can be prepared for pediatric patients, and this has been elaborated in the handout which you can go through. So the take-home messages are that identification of carriers of hemoglobinopathies should be done before marriage or after marriage before conception or during the early antenatal period. For pregnant women identified to be carriers, husband should be screened, and where both the partners are detected to be carriers, prenatal diagnosis should be offered. Newborn screening should be done in communities where sickle gene is prevalent, and both thalassemia and sickle cell disease require long-term comprehensive care and regular monitoring. Hence, education and genetic counseling are very important components of comprehensive management. These are some additional reading materials which are provided with this module, and you may go through at your convenience. Here I would like to acknowledge all experts who have contributed to the NHM training manual on hemoglobinopathies, because the authors have reviewed the manual before making this training module. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Neeta Nadkarni, Senior Scientist F at ICMR NIH, for technical inputs regarding the laboratory workup, and Dr. Farah Jejana, a clinical hematologist and hematoncologist at Hinduja Hospital, who has reviewed the content, and Dr. Anand Purade, a project scientist, for helping prepare the presentation and handouts. These are a few references which you can go through. Thank you for viewing the video. I hope you're ready for the MCQs. The MCQs are posted in the assignment section. Kindly go through them and upload your answers. Thank you and happy learning.